Okay. Well, no time like the present. I'm happy to welcome you to our October EI Cafe webinar, which of course stands for Equitarian Initiative Cafe. This will be part of our 2024 bi-monthly or every other month webinar series. I'm Dr. Angie Varnum. I am Education Director for the Equitarian Initiative. I'm joined here tonight by several Equitarian board members, program leaders, and volunteers, as well as staff members, Dr. Daniela Martinez, and of course, the main event, Ms. Annie Henderson, who will be presenting tonight about our organization. A couple of notes for you and kind of what's expected of you as you listen. Microphone muted is best throughout Annie's presentation. However, turn your camera on if you're able. Post any questions that you have in the chat, and we will address those at the end of the talk. So again, if you do have a question, go ahead and write that down in the chat and we'll have a Q&A following. This recording or this webinar is recorded. And so if you know anyone who wasn't able to make it but is wondering that, we will be sending the recording out to you all and anyone else who registered but could not make it to the talk tonight. Tonight's webinar does not offer continuing education credits. This is an opportunity to understand the organization and kind of a peek behind the curtain. So usually I go into a little bit of an introduction about Equitarian Initiative. That's not going to be necessary tonight. That would be certainly a little bit repetitive. Instead, I want to go into who's behind the scenes here making tonight happen. And you'll be hearing from the first and only executive director of the Equitarian Initiative. Again, that's Annie Henderson. She's been with the organization officially since January of 2019, but she began consulting for the Equitarian Initiative a couple of years prior. We are lucky to have her for multiple reasons, but also because she holds a master's degree in nonprofit management from Regis University in Denver. And she brought a lot of new ideas and structure to the organization, given that background. The rest of us are not as experienced in how to manage a nonprofit. Her main priorities of her work are to strengthen the organizational structure, strategy, and development. And she's uniquely positioned to give an overview of what's been going on with the organization throughout the past year or years. And again, to showcase how we are harnessing impact. I think without further ado, how are you feeling, Annie?
Feeling good, Angie.
All right. And again, welcome to all of you, whether you are a working Equid professional, a supporter, curious, you are welcome here. So you're in the right place. And Annie, the floor is all yours.
Awesome. Thank you, Angie. I like the idea of the Equitarian Curious crew. We have a new demographic. Yeah, thank you guys all so much for being here. I and appreciate you taking your time and joining us this evening. Hopefully it's an informative session. And we'll talk a little bit about, EI's past or present and the future model for creating sustainable impact on working equids and the families who own them. My goal in sharing this information with you all is to give you, as Angie said, a little peek behind the curtains, so to speak. Many of EI's team members, myself included, are heavily immersed in discussions around our strategy and our goals on a daily basis. And those goals and those strategies, they move. They're dynamic and they're based on what we learn and experience, and it's oftentimes based on what the kind of accompanying fields of study reveal to us as we go along. And so we'll talk about a few of those concepts as well. Like I said, the what is shared, on social media, our website, in program reports, et cetera, they just don't necessarily reflect the painstaking process, or that very committed process, which is required to, inform our approach, and that really the massive amount of trial and error that we engage as an organization, and really the subsequent and sometimes subtle evolution of our program model. Again, these are things that we're having daily conversations about, and so we wanted to start exploring opportunities to bring those conversations from what feels like a somewhat insular level right now, more to the doorstep of the greater equitarian community, because we want to not only inform, but we also want your ideas, your experience, your questions, to really help shine a light on a global reality for over 100 million working horses, donkeys, and mules, and the 650 million people who are relying on them. And one of our big goals as an organization that I'll kind of talk about as we go is we want to foster a community that's rooted in shared values and shared knowledge. Something you'll see about our organization, if you're not aware of already, is that we are a very collaborative organization. We're a very open sharing organization. We believe that there are many approaches to this work, that the even the more diversity in those approaches, whether that be in our program partners, other NGOs that are doing this, really the better. I think that having that united front, yet coming at it from different angles, is something that really only strengthens this movement. And so that's something that we really value as an organization. And I don't know that it necessarily sets us apart from other organizations, but it is somewhat unique in this space. So to work with EI as either as a board member, a staff member, a volunteer, or a stakeholder, which can be somebody who is a service recipient, somebody who's a donor, somebody who again is just equicurious in what we do, is really to engage in oftentimes deep theory and solution finding for really complex challenges. To be an equitarian requires an open mind and a tolerance, is perhaps the best way to say it, for having your worldview cracked open over and over and over again. And one characteristic that just seems really shared amongst our community is a commitment to learning and to evolving, even, and I guess especially if they challenge our perspective of what we call impact. So these are, if you have the pleasure to know anybody within our organization, you'll find that most of the folks that we are working with are very open-minded, big-hearted, and ready to serve. So it's really, I really kind of gush over this group, and I really just can't say this enough. It's a huge honor and a privilege to be able to work with the Equitarian Initiative and do what I do here. This is one of the most incredible groups of people, which I'll start gushing over here in a minute. So just a little bit about myself. Like how did I get here? First off, here, let me share a PowerPoint, guys. That might be helpful. Okay, there we go. That looks more professional. So there we go. This corresponds with what I was saying. You might have noticed that by my credentials and what Angie had relayed, that I am not a veterinarian. I'm not an animal scientist, and I'm certainly not cool enough to be a farrier. And although I'm not an equine health professional, I was and am, and I'm likely in good company here in this Zoom room, just an animal obsessed child, specifically of the barnyard variety, and more specifically, a term that I later learned in life, an equid fanatic. Thankfully, when I, started to show symptoms of the horse girl lifestyle, I had a supportive family, and they ultimately went all in. I think my mom was probably trying to live out her own horse girl proclivities, so it worked out. But I can say with confidence that horses were the main foundation of my young life. We leased an empty pasture with an older but functional barn, which meant that all aspects of animal care and husbandry were my responsibility. I mean, I guess hopefully with some responsible adult oversight. Uh, but there was no barn staff. So I never had this, disillusion about the incredible privilege, but also that incredible commitment it requires to, be mucking stalls, bouquet, and all the other things you have to do before you even get to recreate with the animal that, ultimately eats and poops all those chores into infinity. Um, so I know how hard equine enthusiasts work. Um, and based on the fact that everyone here is spending their Wednesday night on a webinar about working animal welfare, I don't really think I need to convince any of you about the profound impact that horses have had on my life or your life. And really that extraordinary bond that we all recognize between humans and horses, that's really transformed our very existence and the viability of humans throughout time. So I'll move on from that for now, but don't worry, I'm sure we'll circle back to horses at some point in this conversation. So as I mentioned, I'm not an animal healthcare professional, so please don't ask for medical advice. My first chosen field of study was actually geared towards environmental policy and conservation, and with those big money interests, I found myself consistently being pulled into the nonprofit sector. And it's here I learned about grassroots organizing, fundraising, strategic planning, and the vital role that our stakeholders and valued cheerleaders and supporters play in driving any kind of movement forward. So I really value that in the equitarian space as well, even though it's become a more household name in the veterinary industry and is a large organization now. We still have very humble roots, and this is a very grassroots feeling team and group. So it's a real pleasure to be able to work with folks who actually are putting boots on the ground, and people who are creating change and coming up with concepts and ideas in real time. So again, my gratitude for being here. My cup overfloweth. So earlier in my career, I was living in Carbondale, Colorado, which is a small central mountain town in close proximity to a little place called Aspen. That's a Dumb and Dumber callback for any of you who were into those 90s flicks. But this region, it's 40 some thousand people, and they have over 600 nonprofit organizations. And I'm really grateful for this time because, between my employment, volunteerism, general professional networking, et cetera, I really had an opportunity to witness organizations that were ran with just the utmost efficiency and commitment to the stewardship of their mission. And, conversely, I saw some that were less so, didn't have that same level of success and or maybe management practices. So, at this point, I figured that if I were destined to work in the nonprofit sector, that I didn't want to fall into that latter category. And so that's when I chose to go to grad school for nonprofit management in Denver. And then here's where it really begins. Enough about me. I met Dr. Jay Merriam, the co-founder of EI. And now I recognize that when I speak about Jay with, I do so with profound love and enthusiasm and kind of a gushing admiration. But I'm also certain that if any of you guys know him, that you do too. And Jay's actually with us tonight, so I'm glad I get to embarrass you a little bit, Jay. That's always a pleasure for me. And to this point, I had worked with a lot of really talented people, a lot of really passionate people, but I had never met a Jay. And when he talked about the Equitarian Initiative, he lit all the way up. Jay's that guy that manages to exude his passion through simply relaying his own experience as an equitarian. His stories make you feel like you were there, or maybe you ought to have been there. And his enthusiasm for his work is only outdone by his love for sharing his knowledge. In fact, I remember very clearly on my very first equitarian trip, Jay was very excited about a particular case that, without remembering that I am a student of the social sciences, he beckoned me over to palpate a soon to not be stallion's testicles. Annie, you've got to feel this. At which point I had to remind him that I'm not a vet or even a vet student. And I quickly found one to replace my spot. But that's the thing, you know, Jay's passion for this work, for mentoring the next generation of equitarians, for cheerleading this movement that he helped build is one of the most inspiring and authentic acts of service that I've known, and more aptly that I've really ever felt. So yeah, the rest is really history. I drank the Kool-Aid, and I've worked with EIs ever since. In 2018, we had a film done by the Equine Network that was shot on location on the project in Peru. And in the film, Jay now famously said, "You can't be unchanged by this work." And he was right. You can't. I know I'm probably getting a little too sappy, a little too early for a webinar, but I can say with the utmost certainty that working with EI has thus far been the most profound privilege of my life. So again, I'll probably just keep saying it as my cup runneth over. So I truly would love to spend the next hour describing the merit and the character of all of the people who are involved in EI with excruciating detail, but I'm afraid that no one has that kind of time on their hands. As I said, it's a really incredible group of people. This team is just awe-inspiring, they're genuine, and they have a capacity to care for others. They have a capacity to care for strangers, and strangers on the other side of the world. And it's a way that, you know, I think reflects the very best side of humanity. And I know there's a lot of corporate rhetoric out there that, you know, at such and such incorporated, you know, we're a family, you know, they have it on their letterhead, but EI is a family, and it's a community, and it's a movement. And you're here this evening because you're a part of it. So thank you so much. Okay, I think that's my time. No, I'm just kidding. We'll talk more about EI. So going into, yep. I'm sorry, I was having a battle with technology today, so some of my fonts got a little cut off, but so I've already kind of talked about Jay a little bit and gushed over him as a part of my own story, because he was really the person that opened the door for me in this work. But Dr. Julie Wilson has equally impacted me and countless people across the world. You know, what Jay Merriam is to infectious positivity, Dr. Julie Wilson is to leadership and innovation. Dr. Wilson is a true visionary and has brought life to EI from the ground up. Both of these two are recognized as global pioneers in the working equid field and the study of practice, and for good reason. In 1992, while vacationing with his wife Shelley in the Dominican Republic, Dr. Merriam, then an equine surgeon in Massachusetts, noticed the poor condition of the working animals he saw in the region of the Samana Peninsula. You know, equids in this region of the Dominican Republic have traditionally transported people, goods, which include, you know, anything from construction supplies, water, milk, and crops, which in that region is often coconut, sugarcane, rice, etc. And these animals were growing across mountainous and coastal terrain. So needless to say, quite a workload from that region. And so while horses, mules, and donkeys continue to be important for agriculture in the Samana region, there's been more of a shift towards horses being used for tourism in the past decade. And, you know, horses now are carrying tourists to sites like waterfalls and beaches. If you ever get a chance to talk to Jay, he'll tell you all about the humpback whales in the region. And that's also become a massive tourist industry there. You know, realistically, so much of that is still being fueled by horses, mules, and donkeys of the region to move those tourists around. So being this, you know, as you can imagine, Jay went and you know, he also saw that lack of access to veterinary care for these animals who were you know, in poor condition. And so he assembled a team of his like-minded colleagues, and they went to work, and thus Project Samana was born. Now, if my math is correct, I believe that's 32 years ago, Jay. I don't mean to date you there. And it's still going. So, and Dr. Wilson's path to becoming a champion of working equids was set into motion at a really early age. As a child, she lived in France, Spain, Thailand, and the Philippines, and she was always looking for outlets for her passion for horses. And so later, as a veterinarian, as a global citizen, Dr. Wilson was well aware of that widespread use of working equids around the world and their subsequent lack of healthcare, and shared Dr. Merriam's call to action on that. So, although working equid welfare has long been on the radar in some cases for century-old UK-based NGOs. Some names you might recognize include Spano World Horse Welfare, the Donkey Sanctuary, and Brook UK. Those are the 4 largest equine charities. But the United States really has some catching up to do. We simply didn't have that infrastructure around working equids. And so this is, to some degrees, a more recent concept than, again, some of these organizations that have been around for 100 years. But, in the 90s and early 2000s, some momentum amongst the, US veterinary colleagues began to brew, and organizations like HSUS, that's Humane Society of the United States, with the Rural Animal Veterinary Services, RAVs, Christian Veterinary Mission, Project Samana is now its own entity at this point. They had initiated projects made up of veterinarians and American veterinary students to provide healthcare internationally across different species. However, to this point, no collaborative and comprehensive program had been established to expressly and exclusively train equine veterinarians in working equid health and welfare. So that's where that vision was born. That's just a quick timeline. We can revisit that later. So in 2009, with the support of the American Association of Equine Practitioners, AAEP, Dr. Merriam and Dr. Wilson facilitated a forum for working equine veterinarians so they could gauge the common interest in improving health and care for working equids, and see how people amongst their community were feeling. And as Dr. Wilson has said, the response was overwhelming, and they watched the room fill up. And this is the group that ultimately became the Equitarian Initiative. Thanks to Dr. Wilson's collaborative mindset, mentorship was immediately sought and provided by 3 organizations in particular. That was the Donkey Sanctuary, UNAM, which is the largest veterinary college in Mexico, also the largest college or university in Mexico, and also World Horse Welfare, as I already mentioned them a little bit. So that next year in 2010, very good. My phone is stuck. In the next year in 2010, the first Equitarian workshop was held in Veracruz, Mexico, and the program was developed with an emphasis on training veterinarians and other equine professionals to understand the needs of working equids and learn best practices for healthcare delivery. Utilizing the community service model of the Donkey Sanctuary in Mexico, workshop participants learned through a combination of didactic presentations, discussions on hands-on healthcare delivery to working equids in low-income communities. And American veterinarians with experience in international equid work served as instructors alongside faculty of UNAM and AMV, which is the Mexico's professional veterinary. I'm having a hard time with veterinary tonight, which is probably not great, but but with their Veterinary Medical Association, it's equivalent to our AAP. And World Horse Welfare provided saddle and harness makers and also farriers as a part of their training program for local individuals to learn these trades as a model for income opportunity. Subsequently, World Horse Welfare invited EI veterinarians to partner with them in Central America and Haiti. And I'll talk about that in just a bit. The initial growth of EI was rapid in that sense, and obviously filled a gap in the existing equine industry. And it was really catalyzed by mentorship and collaboration with like-minded organizations. So as you might be gathering, partnership and shared knowledge are really the foundation from which EI emerged, hence why we celebrate it so heavily today. And from 2010 to 2013, EI hosted an annual workshop held in both Veracruz and Oaxaca, Mexico. The 5th workshop in 2014 was held in a new program region of Nicaragua. And the collaborative spirit of the workshop resulted in 8 participating nonprofit organizations, which included EI, World Horse Welfare, the Donkey Sanctuary, HSVMA, and RAVs, RVET, Sustainable Vets International, Christian Veterinary Mission, and World Vets. This international colloquium of working equid advocates focused on practices for effective healthcare delivery, education, and sustainability. And leaders from these organizations contributed to the curriculum in fieldwork in communities. And the final partner in this workshop was the Nicaraguan Veterinary College, UCC, who provided lecture facilities for part of the workshop. They had 2 participating faculty members and 20 students who attended the lectures and received hands-on training throughout their community service. So that's kind of a little bit of the foundational aspects of where you are going to see these concepts reemerge. Oh, yeah, there's a few photos from Nicaragua from back in the day. In 2016, the Equitarian Workshop moved to the Osa Peninsula of Costa Rica, where it ran through 2020, and it was just on the heels of the COVID-19 pandemic, that last workshop. So during that time, Costa Rica, the workshop model included participation from U.S. veterinary students and new graduates as an opportunity to expand their skills and their worldview. And it was a really fantastic program with, excellent outcomes. But, spoiler alert, the model has shifted in recent years. I'll explain why in just a few moments. Sorry for the cliffhanger on that. But before I kind of get into some of these outcomes, I do want to take a moment and acknowledge the role of AAP in EI's development. Point blank, we wouldn't be here without AAP. And now their charitable arm, which is known as the Foundation for the Horse. To this day, the Foundation of the Horse serves as our single largest program benefactor. And in the early days, AAP gave equitarians the resources and venue to develop and pursue our mission, from those extensive logistics, which make up a lot of our program costs, to supporting scholarships for students and young vets to join our programs. Truly, AAP is the bedrock of our success, and we wouldn't be here today without them. So I think that's very noteworthy to make mention of. Oh, sorry, there's Costa Rica. More photos. While I'm just talking at you guys, it's more fun to look at photos of people on the programs. So impact and outcomes of the workshop. This is really important in terms of EI's evolution and history, and this is a really, really crucial part of where we are today, and what we've really learned about ourselves has come from this model. And so EI's workshop, opened doors for U.S. veterinary professionals and beyond. And here we became really firmly rooted in our educational and clinical approach, and our commitment to that clinical approach. Some other organizations, especially more so recently, are focusing on more welfare as opposed to the veterinary intervention, again, which I think is fantastic. But EI is very rooted in the provision of the veterinary care. So we, as a result of that, workshop participants started to create their own working equid programs as one of the outcomes. And that included, but it's not limited to, Costa Rica, Honduras, Mexico, Guatemala, and Haiti. So now there was this new extensive network of working equid colleagues and a community of equine health professionals with like-minded goals around altruism. And of course, I can't possibly identify each one of them, but among those initial attendees included some names you might know or recognize, including EI board members and volunteers like Dr. Dave Turoff, Dr. Judy Backer, Dr. Neil Gray, EI staff member Dr. Angie Varnum, Dr. Amy McLean, Dr. Mark Anderson, Dr. Stacy Tinkler, Dr. Hal Schott, Dr. David Payton, Dr. John Mitchell, Dr. Jenny Lane, and AAP President-elect Dr. Tracy Turner, former AAP President Dr. Rob Franklin, current partners Dr. Eric Davis of Arvets, Dr. Mariano Hernandez Gil of UNAM, and Dr. Joao Rodriguez of the Donkey Sanctuary, and Dr. Nottenbell, an academic beacon in the study of working equids. So it's, again, that's only a couple of them, of those early workshops. There are so many more. But it's really astounding that, these were each other's peers during this time. And to see where everybody has gone with this work has been absolutely phenomenal to witness. It's clear that when you get involved in EI work or working equid work or health, it's so much more than a part of your job or a part of your career. Like, this is clearly something that's like intrinsic to people's nature. And the people who engage in it are, again, as I described, Jay, they're just all the way in. So, and like I said, so those are just a few of those names. And these folks are, they're elite members and prominent figures within the world of veterinary medicine and animal science. And not only did they participate, but most of them went on to develop new programs and or give some part of their career to the plight of working equids. It would be impossible to truly measure the full scope of what the early EI workshops contributed to the international working equid sector, but those ripples run very deep, and on a nearly weekly basis, we hear about another workshop alumni living a life and career of service somewhere. And, again, a lot of these folks have managed to stay in touch as peers. So, oh yeah, there you go. There's a little, I think I'm behind on my slide, sorry. So, again, this is basically what I just summarized, but, what comes out of this continues to present itself. And then I think I'll just take the opportunity to go just quickly into Honduras really quick and talk a little bit. I mentioned Jay and Samana, so, and this is Dr. Julie Wilson's baby. So although that workshop model served and continues to serve as that catapult into our existence, overall, there was a really strong focus on American veterinarians and veterinary students. As we talked about concepts around sustainability of being the utmost importance, we had to, also ask who our programs were serving. And were we empowering the communities? Did our services add up to long-term impact? And were we effectively engaging local service providers? And I promise you that no matter where we are in our development, these questions will simply never cease for us, and for good reason. They really are, the thing that keeps us centered and brings us back to our mission and what it is we do. So, Dr. Julie Wilson, I believe I mentioned her status as our, in-house visionary and lifelong educator. Forever changed the trajectory of EI's educational model in 2012, and she initiated the Honduras program as a direct result of those early workshops. With the support of World Horse Welfare's infrastructure, the Equitarian Project in Honduras has become the lighthouse for effective in-country engagement to both benefit working equids and provide valuable clinical training for future veterinarians. World Horse Welfare initially invited a team of veterinarians to join their farrier and saddlery training program for 4 days in San Pedro Sula in Honduras. And concurrently, the new UNA, that's the National University or the National College faculty, were invited to bring their class of 10 students and to join U.S. veterinarians to gain clinical experience. So this veterinary college was in a very rural or low-income region where the working equids haul firewood, building materials, trash, agricultural products, etc. And a subset of equids work as personal transportation as well, in addition to agricultural production, specifically in cattle. So without having a teaching hospital available in a region like this, which again is very common across our programs and universities that we work with in Latin America, clinical skills have to be gained by external rotations. And so that's where community service becomes the best classroom. Without 8 local veterinarians also joined in and actively discussed the health problems observed, and shared new veterinary techniques using local resources. Healthcare services included vaccinations against tetanus and rabies, deworming, harness sore and wound care, dentistry, castrations, lameness evaluations, and disease diagnosis. Evening seminars on dentistry and parasites, colic, and lameness were provided to the veterinary students and local veterinarians, and there was a two-way exchange of education and culture that proved to foster an active learning environment, and the veterinary students showed marked skills improvements from hands-on learning opportunities and instruction from EI's team of educators and experts in clinical equine care. There's from that, at the start of the week, and this is really common in all of our programs when we work with veterinary students abroad, at the start of the week, several of the students were frightened by horses. In a lot of cases, some of these students haven't haven't actually touched a horse before. As many of you may know, equine aren't necessarily on the agricultural index of some of the countries where we work, and therefore they being absent from that means that they're also absent in times from veterinary curriculum, because there's no physical transaction of goods like you're going to have if you're, having selling beef by the pound, or eggs, or textiles, etc. So it's as we've heard, horses, mules, and donkeys are considered the invisible workers, because there isn't an accurate census on them. So again, this is something that we still see today. It's very common. But yeah, a lot of these students lacked those skills, and they were frightened by the horses. And by the end of the week, a lot of the students had participated in treatment of hundreds of working equids. They developed physical examination skills equivalent to US veterinary students at the beginning of their senior year, and experienced an effective form of community service. And equine veterinary topics were taught in classroom lectures and wet labs at World Horse Welfare's office. For better efficiency, the lectures were provided on the first 2 days of the week in 2014, and then the wet labs were held in the mornings before traveling into the communities. So community-based equine advisors, farrier and saddle trainees, staff, and local veterinarians were also invited to these educational activities. So this program, why I'm spending some time on it is because this program really set into motion a new understanding of how EI might be able to foster something much greater than just the direct provision of care. It was here that there was an understanding that we may actually be able to give a leg up to local service providers to help animals to then help their communities. And that's something that we, in terms of evolution of the Equitarian Initiative, have continued to move forward towards. Most of you here are probably pretty aware of these. These are kind of common numbers you're going to hear if you delve into any of EI's materials, or listen to a lot of our folks talk at all. But I think that for those of you who perhaps are less familiar with the organization, I think that these concepts really bear repeating. And again, these really keep us honed in on why we do this work. Sometimes I describe to my non-veterinary friends that what we do is certainly based around strong practices in animal welfare, but it's also about the provision of humanitarian aid through animal welfare and through improved animal welfare. I think the reality is, and what we understand is that people are dependent on these animals for their livelihoods. They're dependent on them for income opportunities. They're dependent on them for daily acts, daily chores, daily, activities of living. So it's, their impact is something that is in a lot of ways very difficult to measure, just how much they are contributing to any given family. And it certainly depends on that individual family circumstances. So these are, kind of some of the stats that we always share. And I think that something that's important to point out here is working equids representing 90% of the world's equine population receiving less than 10% of the world's veterinary care. And that is certainly about, distribution of resources, but that is at the end of the day, because veterinarians simply aren't in some of these most rural and low income regions. They're going to go to areas where they have money-making potential. And for those of you in the veterinary industry that are here with us tonight, we're seeing this right now in the veterinary retention crisis, and especially in the equine population. So this is not uncommon that somebody would go towards the income potential, but it does leave the animals that are the true beasts of burden, the animals that are doing the some pretty tough work right alongside of the humans. It does leave them without access to care, and leaves their owners without a lot of resources to improve their care if they would, even if they were motivated to. Again, sorry about my little tech glitch today, but so just a couple of these things. They can, as I just mentioned, they contribute to livelihood. and economic growth, those income opportunities, whether it's in agriculture, trade, commerce and tourism, in a lot of areas where we go work, the animals are taking goods into market and from market. And in some of these regions, electricity isn't abundant. And so the ability to have, a refrigerator, a freezer, isn't there. You need to be going to market on oftentimes a daily basis. So it's not, this is the kind of something during the pandemic that, we gained even more understanding about, because there was, with the stay-at-home orders, and the social distancing, the ability to do that, as we all learned, was actually a real privilege to be able to do it, and a real luxury. But we had the ability to go to the store and put our food in a refrigerator and say, like, I'm not, some of us invested in deep freezers and said, yeah, I don't have to go back there for another 2 weeks. And, we bought all the toilet paper. So that's something that when we think about equitarian work, we just have to remember to sometimes switch into that other worldview. And it's a good example of why, some of our solutions don't apply to some of these other regions. So as I also mentioned, working equities provide transportation. These are areas where fossil fuels, access to them can be quite limited. And, kids are getting to a couple of these photos up here. This one was taken by Dr. Neil Gray here in the upper left-hand corner. That's a child in his school uniform in Costa Rica headed out to class. So he's on his, and you can see that number painted on the side of his horse. That horse just received services, what that means at an equitarian clinic. So now he's got a job to do and take that kiddo to school. So this is a very real, it's not kind of like a shock and awe statement to say this, but it's absolutely true that these animals are really, really important to kids accessing an education, and in many cases accessing medical care. It's oftentimes very removed from where they're at in these rural economies. So it's a literal lifeline in that sense. Global food production, this is one that I'm always trying to figure out in my role and some of the strategy aspects of what I do, is really trying to figure out, how do we talk about this more as a consumer issue? Because it's not just, equine enthusiasts that are engaged in this. So, this is a huge part of it. And so if you don't think you're touched by working equids, I guarantee you are. Empowering women is another huge component of working equids. The Brook UK did an excellent paper on this, that if any of you want to learn more about the impacts of working equids on women's viability and livelihoods, it's very much worth checking out. And access to those vital resources. So again, hauling clean water, firewood, food, all the things. So this is still, we're not through with our 2024 programs. So this is actually this is an estimate based on what we did last year, but this just gives you a sense of what our impact is in any given year. Like I said, we still have some programs to run here as we get into the end of the year. So as you can see, we have over 3,000 animals, 22 partner organizations, 163 students educated, and that number's only increased with the current educational efforts underway. So I just realized I've been going slow, so I'm going to speed it up, guys. So this is a concept, and my goal in chatting with you guys tonight was to, like I said, kind of that peek behind the curtain and talk about some of the things that I don't think, get put out there as much. And we talk about sustainability. It's such a buzzword, and, we're always, trying to achieve this. And I think that one of the things about this work that we have to really keep in mind is that what we are experiencing within EI is really, it's a symptom of poverty. It's a symptom of, a distribution of wealth. This isn't, in most cases, this is not about animal abuse. This is not about, even differences in culture and treatment. Like, this is truly coming from a place where access to resources is limited. And so I think that these are the concepts that this is, like, we talk about ad nauseum in our team. And, without being able to potentially, like raise the GDP of these countries where we work, well, how do we measure our success then? It's something that we have to be very aware of in the work that we do, and look at all the factors that contribute to a successful program. This is just one example of that I, again, anybody who's here from EI knows that we talk about this till we are absolutely blue in the face. And this is something that I think should be shared. It's a nominal service fee on our programs. And typically, what this comes down to is like $2 or $3 for vaccinations, deworming, oftentimes castration, dental work, et cetera. So it's a very symbolic fee, but there are big conversations around, if we're going to discuss sustainability, if we are not having some kind of value added to the work that we're doing, are we setting up care providers in the future to be able to go in and do their job with perceived value from the communities that they're in? Ultimately, on the whole, EI does feel strongly that that the service fees are an important part to adding value, as our goal is to support local service providers and a network of those in the countries where we go visit. Some of the, in terms of sustainability too, I think that a lot of lessons came out of the COVID-19 pandemic, as I kind of alluded to earlier. And, EI projects, the ones that we were able to continue to share resources with and sustain, ultimately were the ones where we had incredibly strong community partners. They were the ones where we had strong university partners. We had strong partners on the ground that were able to deliver some services when we could not physically travel. And so that was a big lesson, regardless of what stage of EI's, of our programs and where we're at, this is a thing that we have to really focus on and understand that if, these things, natural disasters, climate change, political unrest, all these things that we run into in this work, our efforts will not be able to continue without strong partners on the ground. So those who had received some training in, basic preventative medicine and welfare were just more sufficient. And a lot of these communities had to make some pretty tough choices during this time. So the other part of this is an investment, and I'll hopefully have time to get to it, but an investment in a One Health systems, which really supports subsistence agriculture and human viability in the face of things like climate change. And that's just an upcoming reality for us. So, these are things that we have to really be keeping in mind when we develop program models and, we create our approach to trying to do this work. I won't touch on this too much just because I'm a little short on time. And then also the December webinar is going to go into greater detail about all the educational initiatives underway. So as I mentioned, when we talk about sustainability, one of the realizations for the Equitarian Initiative in achieving this is that as we work to define our role in this space, it really does come down to the support and fostering local service provider networks. For us, we're achieving that in two kind of avenues, one being a student-based approach and one being a community-based approach. So these are some examples of who that could be, but not necessarily, that doesn't encompass everybody who might fit into this demographic. And so that student-based education is really important because, as we illustrated in that Honduras model, this is a very, very important demographic of the folks who are going to be trained veterinarians. They are going to be the veterinarians of the future. So the more you can work with them when they are of this in their student era, then the more likelihood that, one, they're going to have some kind of level of commitment to their community, being exposed to some of the challenges that are going on in their own country. And, in addition to that, the more likely they are to stay engaged, in some of these things that are going on, and to also improve their skill sets so that they are, better veterinarians and better service providers in the area. So, like I said, I won't go too far into this, but we're having some really great success. Dr. Angie Barnum, who you've all met here, she's really the architect of this approach. And again, kind of an outcome of the pandemic, is that we established a online educational program via Canvas, and that has been a really incredible resource. And we have been enrolling students in it, in addition to our volunteers as an orientation opportunity, and then also developing community education models. So it also sort of serves as a repository for all things education that EI is working in. Again, that's Dr. Angie Varnum's vision and her really incredible work, and we're just seeing amazing amounts of success in this. Again, community-based education being the other one that we really focus on. I think that there's a lot of discussion around, what is the right level of education to provide to community members. And, that's something we can go back and forth on all day. But the reality is, if we can provide some basic education in welfare and husbandry, and then in addition to basic practices in preventative medicine, then those animals are in such a significantly better place for both them and their lifespan as working animals for those families. So it's a real win-win in that sense. And this is something too that, again, I give credit to Dr. Angie Varnum, really introduced the Equitarian Initiative to this concept more heavily this last year than ever before. And that is the concepts around community engagement. And so what that really means for us is that community members are not, they are not just our service recipients. Community members are active stakeholders in our programs. And that means that we view them as partners, and we want their input. And there's so many reasons for that. But I mean, I think that the most kind of obvious and important one of that is that we simply aren't local, and we can't apply foreign solutions to local challenges. You need to have local knowledge. You need to have people who are versed in the circumstances. And this is really what contributes to that two-way cultural exchange of information and knowledge that makes these relationships so strong. And that is what, is a big, addition or complement to what our success looks like. So this is just hugely important. We worked with a consultant this last year with our team, and so it was really a privilege to kind of dive into that. And so you can look forward to EI kind of creating more metrics around this and figuring out how to do this better. Again, that's kind of what this is all about, is constantly trying to figure out how we can improve, how we can do it better, and how we can, continue to perhaps not achieve, but pursue sustainability in this sense. This kind of is what I just said about working with, somebody as a consultant. She was amazing. And a lot of what this focuses on is, I think this stuff here in yellow is what's really important. The local ownership of solutions, cultural sensitivities, tailored solutions to local needs, increased sustainability, enhanced local capacity, successful collaborative health programs, improved social cohesion and problem resolution, community-led advocacy, a better utilization of resources, and enhanced accountability. That two-way exchange that I talked about, and improved animal welfare being the end result of that. So we're really excited about this. This is really on the forefront of what it is we're doing, and it's a big kind of guiding piece of what we have going on right now. And then the other one, I alluded to this earlier too. So One Health. One Health is ultimately, it's kind of a theory of thought. It's an approach. There isn't a guidebook on how to do One Health, but we actually had a webinar on it a couple months back with Dr. Jenny Lane, who is an expert in One Health. And ultimately, I think that when I describe it to anybody, it's really simple in that One Health is recognizing or acknowledging that the health of humans, animals, and the environment are ultimately inextricably linked. They are all in an interdependent system, and disruption to one leads to disruption in another. So, and we've seen that time and time again. I think when you see humans, if you see a child on one of our programs who, looks malnourished, the likelihood that the horse is too is pretty high. So there's some very obvious correlations. This is increasingly important, again, as we are in the era of climate change and learning how to navigate that. So One Health in our programs will look like us partnering with human-led initiatives, environmental initiatives, et cetera, to really achieve a more well-rounded approach to solving some of these problems. That's not just kind of picking off one of the symptoms, but trying to look at a whole system and say, who do we partner with and how do we solve it? And then looking forward, another thing that we're really working on comes down to some of the program assessment, and what that ultimately looks like for us, that we are trying to capture, and what it is we're doing with our educational initiatives. Again, community engagement, One Health, all the things that we talked about here today. Is that one, again, those graduated students will remain as participants, leaders, stakeholders in our programs. There can be an augmented level of support from service providers locally in these areas. And we can improve preventative medicine through community education. I think that we always say that if we really, if there was a silver bullet to this, and we were really achieving all of our ambitions, that our success would mean that we would work ourselves out of a job. And I say that with air quotes because most of our folks are volunteers. But we'd be working ourselves out of volunteerism, and so that we could assume a role of more of the continuing education, more of a support role, as opposed to some of the direct facilitation. The dream is that we have in-country teams and partners who are actually taking the reins within their own community. And we are seeing this across our programs. One example is our program in Peru. We have 2 students, or they were former students at Unsac Veterinary College outside of Cusco, and they've been trained with EI for several years, and they are now working in the field with our partner organization with our support as technical assistants. So they're providing care when we aren't able to be there. They're doing community animal health worker training when we can't be there. So that's delivering, education to those community members. And this is what we want to see. This is what we want to put into motion. So this is a really important, one of those outcomes. So I think that's just it for time. Sorry, I've already got 2 minutes over. Of course, can't leave without a call to action. As I've talked about, the emphasis here is on the local population. And so financial aid opportunities need to be developed for those in-country students and community animal health workers, anybody who's participating in our program. I think that, again, kind of shifting our worldview and thinking about being in a different place, most instances, locals, the opportunity to volunteer is actually a luxury. It's very much a privilege, and it's something that a lot of people can't afford. To miss out on daily income is something that people simply can't do. So in later 2024, we're coming right up on that. We're going to be creating the J. Merriam Scholarship Fund to support EI leaders, with priority given to the local participants from the countries where we're coming from. So we're really excited about that. So stay tuned. Sorry, I'm over time, but if anybody has any questions, you can either put them in the chat or you can email me too, which is at, and I can put that. I won't make you, I won't spell it, Equitarian Initiative. I'll put it in the chat for you. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Annie. I think it is important to look deep at some of the themes that you brought up tonight that can be recognizing the challenges that exist and our small part that we're playing in addressing them. So thank you for sharing a bigger perspective of what's been going on in the organization under your leadership. Two questions which came through during the presentation. I'll start with the first one, which is, are you able to get into Cuba at this point? Annie, I can take that one, which is that several working equity organizations exist in Cuba, at least 2 that I'm aware of. The Equitarian Initiative does not currently have programming in Cuba. However, I will be visiting the country in just a couple of weeks with one of said organizations there. I was invited there. And so US professionals are able to travel to Cuba at this point, if that adequately addresses the question. 2 working equity organizations who exist there, to my knowledge, include one called Cuba's Horses and another called World Horse Welfare, but of course there may be others. A second question is wondering if you will have another webinar focused more on the ins and outs of your workshop opportunities.
Yeah, I can feel that, Angie.
Sure.
I actually had that as a part of my chat, but cut it short just because I was running low on time. But so the workshop model to this point is not currently in existence, and that is because, as I mentioned, the Costa Rica workshop that was on the heels of the COVID-19 pandemic. When we came back, we were able to travel again at that time. This is when, you know, we took that time to really deep dive into these discussions around sustainability, local partners, et cetera. And we felt that one of the things that we needed to shift in that model was to focus more on local participants, you know, as opposed to, in some cases, U.S. volunteers. Of course, we still have U.S. volunteers who go to Costa Rica and to our other programs. It's not to say that we don't, but increasingly we are trying to place that emphasis on the population of service providers in the regions where we go visit and go provide care. So that program, in the 2 years following the pandemic, we shifted into an owner education module. So that's community education based. And in both circumstances, we had over 80 owners participate in that community education opportunity there. So that was a really huge win, and demonstrated a lot of trust from that community in us. The animals, this particular area is incredibly gorgeous, where we were holding the workshop, and with that, it's a desirable place to be. And as we all know, following the pandemic, some of those areas had an influx of resources and money kind of come in with people who wanted to maintain a residence there. And so the demographic there has actually shifted a bit. And there are now 3 veterinarians on the Osa Peninsula that we previously did not have there. And so that's another thing to kind of consider in our work, was more looking at trips and possible program regions. We won't go work in areas where there's existing veterinarians unless we're partnered with them at their request, because we're not going to, you know, impede on somebody's livelihood. So we are working directly with those vets to provide them some continuing education opportunities, and do some equine specific training with them. And again, that's really the best case scenario, is that these programs are somewhat taken over by the local population.
I'm not seeing any further questions in the chat. Thanks again to everyone for joining. Thanks, Annie. And mark your calendars for the next EI Cafe webinar. Again, that's every other month, putting us out in the month of December with a year-end wrap-up, December 18th. The way you can receive further notifications is through our email listserv, as well as social media. We are on Facebook and Instagram, and so you will see announcements about the registration for upcoming webinars there. You'll see Annie's email in the chat for further questions, or would it be okay as well if they wanted to be signed up for the email listserv, Annie, to email you?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Yeah, or go to our website. There's a prompt on that homepage that you can sign up for the mailing list right there.
Wonderful. Okay. We wish you all a good night. Thank you for joining.
Thank you all.